My son-in-law punched me in the mouth. Hard. I tasted blood before I even hit the floor. And then, through the ringing in my ears, I heard my daughter's voice. Not screaming for me. No. Screaming at me. Get out of my house. She didn't wait. She grabbed me by the hair. The same daughter I raised, protected, walked down the aisle, and dragged me across the living room like I was some kind of criminal. Her husband stood there, watching, smirking. I was 64 years old, a retired Army vet, a builder, a father. But at that moment, I was just a broken man, bleeding on the sidewalk outside the house I bought for them. And behind all the screaming, behind the violence, was one number. $3 million. My name is Thomas Burke. I live in Colorado Springs. I spent 22 years building my construction company from the ground up. Brick by brick. Mistake by mistake. Win by win. I had one daughter. Her name was Katie. When her mother passed away from cancer, Katie was 16. And I did everything, to make sure she still felt safe in this world. I learned how to braid her hair. I sat through awkward middle school plays, terrible high school breakups, late-night college panic calls, and when she met Jake, the man she'd eventually marry, I kept my mouth shut. Even though something about him never quite sat right with me. Now people might ask me, Tom, why didn't you walk away? Why didn't you just call the police right there? Because I knew something they didn't. They thought that punch was the end. They thought dragging me out of that house was going to shut me up. What they didn't know was I already had every document, every wire transfer, every voice note, backed up, time-stamped, and secured. And that $3 million they tried to erase me for? That money came with a trail. A trail I was ready to follow, all the way back to the truth. But before I tell you how I exposed them in front of lawyers, cops, and a courtroom full of stunned faces, you need to understand the daughter I raised, the life I built, and how love can blind a man long enough to walk straight into a trap. Because this story doesn't start with a punch. It starts with a promise. One I never thought my own blood would break. For most of my life, I believed in the idea that if you work hard, love your family, and keep your promises, the world will eventually be good to you. I wasn't born with much, but I built something. A small construction company, Burke Builders, that started with just me, a busted truck, and a few rusty tools. By the time I turned 55, we had 27 employees, contracts all across Colorado, and a reputation for being honest, on time, and never cutting corners. My wife, Susan, was my backbone. Quiet, brilliant, and stronger than I deserved. When cancer took her in 2012, I thought I'd never get up again. But I had a reason to keep going. Our daughter, Katie. Katie was my world. My only child. The light that kept the house warm even when the grief turned everything cold. She was 16 when her mother died, and I saw her grow up overnight. She started taking care of me when I should have been taking care of her. I used to hear her cry in her room at night and pretend not to notice, just so she could feel like she had space to be weak. But even then, she never asked for anything. Straight-A student. Smart. Kind. Everyone loved her. I promised Susan, before she passed, that I'd get Katie through college debt-free. And I did. Every paycheck, every project, every dollar I saved went into that girl's future. When she brought Jake home, I tried to be open-minded. He was polite. A little slick. Sales background. Always smiling, a little too much. He complimented the house too many times, asked weirdly specific questions about my company's value and assets, but I brushed it off. I told myself I was being overprotective. She loved him, and that was enough for me. A year later, they got married. Small ceremony. She looked just like her mother walking down the aisle. And when they said their vows, I cried harder than I'd cried in years. After the wedding, Katie and Jake started talking about buying a house, starting a business. They didn't ask for money directly, not at first. Just advice. Support. And of course I gave it. I helped co-sign the loan on a new place. I, temporarily, put $250,000 into a shared account with them for what I was told was a down payment and renovations. Jake said he'd pay it back with interest once their business took off. It never did. Still, I trusted them. Why wouldn't I? Katie started coming around less. I figured it was normal, newlyweds adjusting to life. But every time I dropped by unannounced, they looked uncomfortable, like I was interrupting something. Jake would make jokes about how I still hovered over my investment. I laughed along, but something inside me started to shift. I'd hear things when I walked in, conversations that stopped mid-sentence. Financial documents out on the table, quickly shuffled away. Still, I told myself, she's your daughter. You raised her. She wouldn't hurt you. But there was one moment that stuck in my mind. Katie and I were having coffee one morning, just us, and she looked me dead in the eye and said, "Dad, if something ever happened to you, who would handle your estate?" I laughed and told her I wasn't going anywhere, but I remember her face. She wasn't smiling. That was the first time I felt it, that deep, sharp pull in my gut. The feeling that something wasn't right. Things didn't fall apart overnight. That's the cruel thing about betrayal. It doesn't announce itself. It whispers. It creeps. It builds like a slow leak behind drywall. And by the time you see the cracks, the damage is already done. I started noticing little things. Jake's car, a brand new black Audi, parked outside their house, even though he told me they were tight on cash. Katie stopped answering my calls right away. When she did respond, her voice had this forced cheerfulness to it. I brushed it off at first, but the tension in my chest kept growing, like a knot I couldn't untie. One night, I stopped by their place to drop off some documents Katie had left at mine. They didn't know I was coming. When I walked up the porch, I could hear them inside. Not fighting, planning. Jake's voice was low but sharp. "He's not going to live forever, Katie," he said. "And when he's gone, it's all ours. The business, the accounts. He's not even paying attention." I didn't knock. I didn't walk in. I just stood there, frozen. My own daughter's voice came next, quieter, hesitant. "But what if he changes the will?" I left without them ever knowing I was there. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my garage, just staring at the old file cabinet where I kept my business papers. For years, I'd operated on trust. Verbal agreements. Family handshake deals. But something about that night made me realize how naive I'd been. I started reviewing everything. The co-signed documents. The joint account transfers. The small, temporary withdrawals Jake had made that were never returned. They added up, and fast. Over $1.3 million had moved out of my control in just under 14 months. Still, I said nothing. Instead, I started watching closely. Every time we met for dinner, I paid attention to what Jake said, and more importantly, what he didn't say. He started asking oddly specific questions. "Do you still keep paper records, or is it all digital now?" Do you have a power of attorney just in case? One time he even joked, "Hey, old man, if you ever drop dead, make sure you leave me the password to your vault." Katie laughed. I didn't. And then came the night that confirmed everything. It was 2:07 a.m. I couldn't sleep, so I got up to check my email. I happened to log into an old account I barely used anymore, one that was still connected to my business documents. And there it was, a notification of a PDF download from Katie's IP address. A document labeled, "Final Transfer Instructions, Burke Holdings." It was a file that should have only existed on a flash drive I kept locked to my desk. I just stared at the screen. It was like watching my own daughter's hand reach into my chest and twist. But I still didn't yell. I didn't storm over. I didn't call her. I started printing. The morning after I saw that PDF download, I didn't go to their house. I didn't call. I didn't even flinch. I got dressed like I always did, dark jeans, flannel shirt, steel-toe boots, and walked into my office like nothing had changed. But inside me, something had shifted permanently. The last thread of denial had snapped. I could feel it in the way my hands stopped trembling when I held the printed documents. The way my voice was suddenly calm, even when I spoke out loud to no one in the room. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't heartbroken. I was focused. A few days later, Katie invited me over for dinner, like nothing had happened. She smiled that same crooked smile she used to wear as a kid when she'd stolen cookies from the jar, and thought I didn't know. Jake was unusually warm that night. Too warm. "Tom, we were actually thinking of helping you with your estate stuff," he said, pouring me a drink. "You know, just to make sure things are organized." I nodded, smiled, took the glass. But I didn't drink it. That's when I saw it, the envelope sitting half-tucked under a stack of mail on the counter. My name was on it, handwritten. And inside? A forged signature. Mine. On a legal document that transferred full ownership of Burke Builders to a holding company Jake had set up in Wyoming under a different name. They weren't just stealing from me anymore. They were erasing me. Right then, Katie turned to refill my glass, and for a split second, she caught my eyes. Maybe she saw it. The stillness. The awareness. The death of the man who used to worship her unconditionally. She blinked, and that smile faltered for just a breath. That was the moment I knew. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flip the table. I just stood up, said I wasn't feeling well, and walked out. They had no idea what was coming next. Because I'd stopped being their father that night, and started becoming their reckoning. The next morning, I opened a fresh notebook. Page 1, center of the top line. I wrote one word in capital letters. War. But not the kind with fists or yelling. No. This would be the kind of war that left no bruises, only signatures. I started with my attorney, a man I'd known for 20 years. I walked into his office carrying a folder full of printouts, recordings, and transaction logs. He listened in silence as I laid it all out: the forged signature, the asset transfers, the recorded conversations from their home security system that automatically backed up to my cloud. Jake didn't realize that when he bragged about burying the old man, he was being saved to a hard drive in real time. We drafted a full legal freeze on all my company's assets. I removed Jake and Katie from every joint account, terminated their access to all financial platforms, and filed an injunction preventing any property sales or business restructures. But I didn't serve the papers yet. Not yet. I wanted them comfortable. Arrogant. I wanted Jake to think he won. So I started playing the part, calling Katie now and then with a tired voice, pretending to be confused about some missing statements. I asked dumb questions. Let Jake feel smart. Meanwhile, I hired a forensic accountant. Within a week, we traced over $2.7 million they'd attempted to siphon into private crypto wallets and offshore accounts. All logged. All reversible. Then I went one level deeper. I contacted the bank where my daughter and son-in-law had opened a shell company for family investments. Turns out, Katie had falsely claimed I had given them power of attorney. One phone call and 3 documents later, that lie collapsed. My attorney sent a formal letter to the bank's fraud department. Now the bank was involved, and scared. They cooperated fully. Everything was turning in my favor, quietly. And then I set the final trap. I scheduled a family estate meeting, a fake one. Told them my lawyer wanted to meet with all of us to help prepare my will and review my end-of-life plans. Jake showed up early, slick suit, confident grin. Katie looked tired, but composed. I sat across from them, a recorder in my pocket, my lawyer in the next room, and a deputy sheriff, off-duty but in uniform, posted just outside the office door. For 30 minutes, I let them talk. They confessed everything without realizing it. Jake mentioned the new business structure. Katie referred to the transition of the company, and at one point, God help her, she said, "It's not like we're stealing." You said it yourself, Dad. You don't have that many years left. We're just getting things ready. That was all I needed. I pressed stop on my recorder, opened the office door, and let the real game begin. Jake's smile didn't last long. As soon as I opened that office door, he turned to see not another lawyer, but a uniformed deputy sheriff walking in behind me. My attorney entered next, holding a folder of documents nearly 2 inches thick, all of it time-stamped, notarized, and legally bulletproof. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse them. I just looked Jake dead in the eye and said, "I know everything." Katie blinked first. "What is this?" she stammered, already paling. I slid a printed email across the table, her request to the bank, falsely claiming power of attorney, her forged digital signature at the bottom. Then I opened the folder and laid out a series of screenshots, wire transfers to accounts in Jake's name, cleverly disguised under a shell company. A voice recording followed, one where he joked about putting the old man out to pasture. He tried to deny it, until I played the audio clip right there in front of everyone. His voice, his words, crystal clear. The deputy stepped forward and said calmly, "Sir, based on the documents presented here today, you may want to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you." That's when Jake stood up, fast, aggressive, stupid. "This is Bulls ****, he yelled. "He's senile. You're all falling for this old man's paranoia." He turned to Katie for support, but she was frozen, ashen, silent. She knew. She just didn't think I'd ever fight back. The deputy told him to sit. Jake refused. So he was cuffed. Right there. In my office. The man who punched me, mocked me, tried to steal everything I built, walked out in handcuffs while I stood with my hands folded and my eyes steady. Katie didn't get arrested, but her face said everything. She knew she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. She didn't say a word to me when she left. Not sorry. Not goodbye. Nothing. Within a week, a full investigation was launched. The banks froze every account linked to Jake. Civil charges were filed. Then came criminal ones, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to defraud an elder. Katie tried to claim she was manipulated, but the paper trail told another story. She didn't go to jail, but she lost everything that mattered: her credibility, her business, her access to my legacy. The community was stunned. I didn't make a scene. I didn't have to. The court proceedings were public. The evidence was airtight. People saw them for who they truly were. Jake pled guilty in exchange for a lighter sentence: 5 years in federal prison. Katie disappeared from the town, unable to face what she'd done. And me? I went back to work. Quietly. Steadily. I rebuilt everything they tried to destroy. It's been almost 2 years since that day in the office. The day Jake walked out in handcuffs, and my daughter walked out in silence. People ask me if I regret any of it, if I wish I'd handled it differently. The truth? I wish none of it had happened. I wish the girl I raised, the one who clung to me when she was 5 and scared of thunderstorms, had never been twisted by greed. I wish she remembered who I was before she let him poison her against me. But wishing doesn't change the past. And justice doesn't wait for apologies. I sold the company 6 months after the court battle ended. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I was tired. Not just physically, but emotionally. I'd spent decades building something with my hands, only to watch my own blood try to dismantle it with a signature. So I let it go, on my terms. The sale brought in enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. More than comfortably. But I don't live big. I bought a small cabin up in Estes Park. Quiet place. No noise. No drama. Just pine trees, mountain air, and peace. Sometimes I still get letters from Katie. They're always the same. I was confused. Jake pressured me. I miss you. I read them. I don't respond. Maybe one day I will. But that day hasn't come yet. What I've learned is this: betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it wears the face you once kissed goodnight. Sometimes it calls you Dad. But no matter who it is, no matter how close they stand, the truth still matters. Your dignity still matters. And when they try to take everything from you, you still have a choice. You can let them bury you. Or you can rise, quietly, powerfully, and remind them who you are. So to anyone listening, anyone who's been betrayed, forgotten, stolen from, don't let the punch be the end. Let it be the beginning of your strength, your clarity, your rebuild. Because they took everything from me, except my soul. And from that, I rebuilt everything. Not for them. Not for revenge. For me.